February in Colorado when he left the house wearing flip-flops and a t-shirt. As the door closed behind him, a haunting reality set in. He might not survive. At the time, he had been through 12 treatment attempts at recovery. He was living in our home, and his active substance use was worse than ever. I was desperate and had resorted to things like tracking his phone, monitoring bank accounts, and driving around all hours of the night, believing that I could save him. None of those things worked, and my home had become a war zone. I turned around and asked myself a really hard question. Was I okay with the last thing that he saw, felt, and heard from me? The answer to that question was no. And in that moment, my world went from black and white to color, as I realized that my role in this story had to change. I am now a professional who supports families that love someone struggling with substance use disorder. I'm also a mom who has lived the stories of the families that I work with. My someone is my oldest son, Noah, and I have found recovery from the effects of addiction in my family. The process of structured family support is what I call parallel recovery, and I believe it is one of the most powerful and accessible tools that we have to address the addiction epidemic, yet we are not accessing that resource. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's January 2023 data, 46.3 million Americans fall under the diagnostic criteria for substance use disorder. All of those people are loved by someone. Addiction is not a label or an identity. People who use drugs and alcohol are suffering, and the shame and stigma that they and their families carry is preventing them from getting the help that they need and encouraging their families to detach from the very people who need their connection the most. The CDC reported in 2022 that more than 200,000 people died from an unintended overdose or alcohol-related reason. We are losing more than 500 people every single day to drugs and alcohol. And everyone believes that they are helping this problem by pointing their finger externally at big things that need to change. But what we are failing to see is a solution that's right in front of us in the family system. The NIH has reported data that says when families are engaged in a comprehensive system of engaging with their loved one, they have a 64% success rate in that person seeking recovery. Recovery is not only about the person using substances. It includes changing the narratives and the dialogues of the families and communities around them. Parallel recovery is the process of learning to live and love with the intention of connection and sustainability. People need to be loved, and it's really hard to love people who use drugs and alcohol. So how do we do it? It requires reflection on who we have become and who we want to be in this relationship. It requires being able to understand how to separate a person from the behavior, and it requires access to communication skills so that we can be heard. Parallel recovery is not about getting them better. It is about creating the connections that they want to get better for. There's a process, there's an order, and it's accessible. Step 1, reflection and self-awareness. Most of us have heard the phrase, addiction is a family disease. What that means to me is the ripple effects of substance use on the whole family. They become lost in this journey, guided by fear and desperation, which leaves them in a relationship with a disorder rather than a person. I woke up a door slammer. I'm not sure when I went to bed one, but I woke up slamming all the doors. Families become controlling and micromanaging, or they end up a doormat in their relationship. They need to be guided to reflect on who they have become in this disease and who it is that they want to be in this relationship. If they don't, they're going to continue to engage with a behavior whose sole purpose is to hide everyone around from the underlying pain and suffering. My door slamming had me entangled, not with my son, but with his substance use, while it hid the person suffering and pushed him out the door. Step 2 requires a deeper reflection, education, and understanding around the complexities of substance use. Families are offered a lot of messages and suggestions that are packaged as help. What they need is education that's factual, that's person-centered, and not stigmatizing. I walked around believing that my son was choosing to be a drug addict and that I was keeping him there by being codependent and enabling. Reality, he was in pain, I was trying to save him, neither of us knew another way. These were messages that we heard from society and from the people who were supposed to be helping. Truth is, substance use is not a personal attack, it's not selfish behavior, and it's not a moral failing. My son was suffering, and drugs and alcohol work until they don't. People are dying believing they are their disease because those around them cannot understand the why beneath the behavior. When I learned how to separate my son from his substance use, I could see that he was not a drug addict, but a person who was experiencing pain in life that he did not know how to solve another way. Parallel recovery requires us to release the burden of making us okay on somebody else changing their behavior. In action, this looks like parents who can take a phone call from a child who has recently relapsed and listen to them while they think through their options, even if those options look something other than what they would want. It looks like people who can sit with a partner struggling in early sobriety who has recently returned from a trip that included drinking and ask questions around what led up to that behavior instead of attacking the misstep. Things were supposed to go a certain way for us. We were not those people. What I came to understand is those are people who are hurting, and so was my son. When we start to love without the need for an outcome, we love radically, loving the person and hating the behavior. Finally, parallel recovery requires access to the tools of communicating and behaving in a way that focuses on connecting to the person rather than changing their behavior. Families can lean into their relationships with intention to connect rather than reacting out of fear and anger. This allows them to start empowering the person and stop empowering the problem. All I wanted when I was slamming those doors was for my son to listen to me. Yet every single time we spoke, I was offering answers to questions that he wasn't asking. I lived in fear, and fear does not prevent dying. I had to learn to listen to him while he was suffering, not if he got better. Families can learn to set boundaries that don't ask somebody else to change their behavior in order to be loved. My son had written an essay entitled "A House on Top of a Home." What I can now hear he was saying, loud and clear, is that he wasn't the problem. He had a problem. And I was not creating an environment for him to experience that problem and solve it any other way. I hear over and over from the families that I work with that if they had this help 10 years ago, they wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't either. Families have to be invited into the recovery process and offered a system of engaging that we know to be effective. They become a part of the problem, and we need them to be a part of the solution. Substance use and medical professionals provide access to comprehensive family support and invite and expect families to engage. They're not going to want to. It's hard. but we need them to. Families, this can't end with an invitation. It needs willing participants. And it's going to be hard work. If this is speaking to you, things have probably been pretty difficult. In fact, they've probably sucked. But they can suck less. Engage in your own recovery process and learn how to do this better. This is a complicated problem with a lot of really big things that need to change. But the one thing that I know through my own lived experience and through the hundreds of families that I have personally supported is the parallel recovery process unlocks a 64% success rate in a loved one seeking recovery. If we did nothing else except to engage the family in a comprehensive system of reflection, of education, and of communication, less people would die. Ultimately, my son engaged in 15 different treatment programs to get where he is today in his recovery. All of those programs offered family support. None of those programs offered parallel recovery. It was not until I went out, reflected on who I had become and who it was that I wanted to be, until I realized how to separate my son from his behavior and love him where he was. And until I learned how to communicate in ways that both of us could be heard, that I was able to create the home that he could come back to and be successful in. So look, 64%, it's not 100. Drugs and alcohol kill people, and they're going to continue to. But the process of parallel recovery including the whole family, can make next year's numbers smaller. Thank you.